Bernard Arnault is the richest man in the world, the head of the LVMH empire, $500 billion luxury powerhouse home. Dozens of iconic brands are there: Louis Vuitton, Tiffany, Dom Perignon.
The Frenchman's been richer than Musk and Bezos and is ruthless in business. Some call him the wolf in Cashmere.
Today on The Nexus, we're looking at the wolf in Cashmere, the king of luxury, a ruthless businessman who is sometimes the world's richest man. I'm talking about Bernard Arnault, who, despite his vast wealth, manages somehow to keep a relatively low profile. He runs LVMH, which is a vast empire of brands, including Christian Dior, Tiffanys, and the jewellery maker Bulgari. And today we're looking at how he made his money, how he runs his family, and why so many French people seem to hate him. Bernard Arnault is the third richest man in the world after Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, with an estimated fortune of close to $200 billion. And sometimes, when financial conditions are right, he's number one. Unlike most of Forbes' top 10 billionaires, he's not a t-shirt wearing techie who lives in America. He's an impeccably dressed Frenchman who lives in Paris. His rivals sell products and services we can all relate to. Twitter, or should I call it X, Facebook, Amazon and Microsoft. Well, they're used everywhere by everyone. But the king of luxury sells things only the select few can afford. Christian Dior dresses, Tiffany & Co. jewellery, and the classic Louis Vuitton luggage.
He recognized that there would be a taste for luxury goods and, frankly, an ability to pay for them.
Fortunately for Bernard Arnault, the select few are more numerous than they used to be. More diverse too. Its sales are booming in Asia, particularly in China. And so Monsieur Arnault's LVMH empire has expanded and made more and more money every year, except for the COVID period. But once that was over, luxury spending came back with a vengeance. Given all that, you'd think that Bernard Arnault had always been in fashion, but actually he trained to be an engineer. And while his mother was reportedly obsessed with the Dior brand, his father owned a civil engineering firm. In 1971, when Bernard Arnault graduated, aged 22, he joined his father's firm and quickly became the company's president in a few short years. And in 1984, he took his first big step into the luxury goods world, buying Financier Agache and later Boussac Group, which owned his mother's favourite brand, Christian Dior. It was then that the wolf in Cashmere first bared his teeth, firing 9,000 workers in just 2 years, a very un-French thing to do. And then in the mid-80s, Arnault orchestrated the merger of Louis Vuitton and Moet Hennessy to create LVMH. He then managed to buy enough shares to install himself as leader, casting out LV's president in the process. After nearly 30 years in charge of LVMH, he briefly considered moving to Belgium, when President François Hollande floated the idea of a 75% tax rate. Some in France were outraged. Since then, he's acquired more and more brands to expand his empire. And in his private life, he expanded his family. He has 5 children, all of whom have an important role in running the company.
I have been lucky, I must say, to have fantastic children. They are, all of them, interested by the family business.
The Arnault family has been compared to the HBO series Succession, which is about a wealthy media magnate who's trying to decide who should take over from him, a series loosely based on the Rupert Murdoch family. But this French version of Succession may not be resolved for a few years, as Arnault has taken steps to ensure he keeps a tight grip on power until the end of the decade. So he's incredibly rich, his empire's spread all over the world, and yet, as our producer found out, very few people have actually ever heard of him.
These are the world's 3 richest men. Yeah. Of the 3, who do you recognize? So, who do you...
Elon Musk.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos.
Do you know who this is?
No.
I don't know what his name is, but he owns Hennessy.
Yes. And why do you think Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are well known, whereas this guy isn't?
Because they're bumbling idiots.
Do you think these two, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, are attention seekers?
Yeah.
I just have a quick question. Do you recognize any of these people on the poster? They're the world's 3 richest men. Who do you recognize out of these 3?
Elon Musk.
Uh-huh.
Bezos.
Yeah, Bezos. Do you know who this is?
I don't know him.
So Elon Musk is incredibly well known. Jeff Bezos, say no more. But why is Bernard Arnault quite unknown to members of the public?
I guess maybe by choice. He doesn't want to appear in the media as much.
whilst I guess for Elon Musk's brand, it's probably quite good for him to be in the media, selling more cars and stuff. I don't know. And he's quite a controversial character anyway, so.
Yeah, he's always on Twitter. Like Elon Musk, you always hear controversial stuff he's saying. And then Jeff Bezos is almost similar. I know that with Bernie, he's more of a lot of his sons and daughters run most of the company he's got, so I think he takes like a step back approach. And that's probably why people don't really know about him, I guess.
You probably know that he's the second richest man on earth.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what does that tell you, that when most members of the public don't actually know who he is?
Does it really matter? They know the brands.
So why do you think that these two are very well known, but Bernard Arnault is quite well unknown?
I think he's a bit low profile, to me.
Yeah.
He don't expose himself too much.
Yes.
Unless it's required.
Yeah.
But I think he did a lot of charity, that's all. Yeah.
In France, does he not pay his taxes?
He pays not enough taxes not enough.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now, and today we're joined by Benjamin Rankin, a former executive at LVMH. We also have the Paris-based journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet and the branding expert Dean Crutchfield. Welcome to all three of you. Benjamin Rankin, I'd like to start with you. You were a very high flyer at LVMH, and you know very well that your former boss is known as the wolf in Cashmere. Did he really earn that reputation?
I wouldn't call him a wolf in Cashmere at all. He's a visionary leader. He is a patient businessman, meaning he's willing to let a brand grow for 20 years before it makes money. He knows how to recruit and hire brand leadership and leave them the freedom to do what they need to do. So for me, he's a visionary leader in the luxury segment.
I guess the name was really earned by doing things like, sacking thousands of people when he first took over the company, and also in sort of crushing the opposition in negotiations. For example, his interaction with Tiffanys. If you don't call him the wolf in Cashmere, would you call him ruthless? Would you call him tough?
So I'd just like to bring up a couple things in terms of what you said. It was actually in the textile industry, which had nothing to do with the luxury segment, where 2,000 people were let go when he shifted his business model before taking over LVMH. Now, in terms of the Tiffanys negotiation, they were paying out huge dividends despite losing money. And so any business person would question that while they were in exclusive negotiations in terms of whether they're paying the right price for a company which is deciding to give huge dividends despite losing money.
And he's been able to grow the company almost every single year. What is the secret?
Absolutely.
What is the secret to his success?
I think I was a long-time executive of Louis Vuitton, and you may love them or hate them, but in terms of branding, they're one of the top brands. And they're one of the top brands because they were visionary in 1978 by already having the vision to have exclusive distribution, by stopping licenses, by stopping franchises, by having a total control over the image of what is seen from production to distribution to the end customer experience.
To what extent has the sort of expansion east fueled this growth? I'm talking about specifically China.
It's an excellent question. All businesses were making a ton of money in China in the year 2000s and the year 2010s. It's become more complicated for everybody now, and I think we have to anticipate some headwinds going on in the Chinese market, much like we had headwinds in the Japanese market in the year 2000s. So you're always looking for your new markets, and I think the question is today, what are the next new markets?
Right. Well, what are they?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I suspect India is going to be coming up strong. Latin America, if they can actually cut the customs taxes that they have for companies to do business there, there's huge potential, but they all end up buying in Miami or Europe. But at some point, South America should have its day.
Dean, whilst we're praising him, I might as well come to you. I know you're a big fan. What makes him such a special person in the luxury goods market and indeed across business?
Well, because he's a magician. The guy's, he is a ruthless businessman, but in a way that you have to look at positively because he's been so successful at doing it with an incredible appetite for acquisition, a deal maker, and basically has created an incredible growth engine. I mean, his businesses are putting, $1.5 billion through the tills every week. It's a phenomenal machine, and it just keeps growing. So yes, he's an admirable man, as they say, a terrific piece of real estate. So I think the big question is, who are you? What's is the purpose just LVMH, or is there something bigger there?
Well, let's go to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. What kind of a man is he in France? What kind of a figure is he?
Well, there are several things that we could look into this. As a man in France, he is certainly one of the great successors of the country and has ever known in the past century almost. He's the richest or second richest man in the world, mostly depending on the exchange rate. The other one being Elon Musk. But really, it's a great achievement. The other thing is that he has entirely redefined the notion of luxury, in that he took brands that were well known but were very different in the way they were being run, and he has built a behemoth which cannot be caught up with any longer. He used to have a competitor in France, François Pinault, who has the Kering Group. They have Saint Laurent, they have Gucci, they have others, but they are now far behind. I think poor François Pinault must content himself with a fortune of about 90 billion euros as opposed to about 4 times that much for Bernard Arnault. But also there's less consistency in the way all of this is achieved. Arnault ought to be popular in France because he has created 160,000 jobs in France, over a total employees of 196,000. Nonetheless, the French have got an extremely strong position about rich people. They do not like them, of course, on the left, but also large the segments of the right, including the National Rally, i.e. the popular right, the populist right. Recently, he gave 10 million euros to a historic soup kitchen and food bank created in the 80s, which has had even more need nowadays. All the same, he got criticized for it, saying he was poor washing his ill-gotten fortune, even though his companies pay taxes in France.
Let's dig into that a bit more, shall we? Because it's been picked up here in London as well by various publications. I just want to read you the headline: Bernard Arnault's $10 million donation to a charity condemned by the left. So at first you'd think, oh, they would give him a lot of praise for that. And then it goes on to say, a 10 million euro donation by Bernard Arnault, France's richest person, to the country's biggest food bank has triggered a torrent of contempt from the left. What they don't like about it, though, is the fact that they say, anyway, that if he'd just pay his taxes properly, that would dwarf his donation of 10 million euros. Yeah.
Well, he uses tax optimization within the framework of the law, and he's very much watched, so there's nothing else he can do. He pays, as I said, his companies pay all the taxes that need to be paid in France. There are subsidiaries of LVMH around the world, and if they pay taxes in Japan because they operate in Japan, they have shops in Japan, they will pay tax in Japan, and there's a tax treaty between Japan and France that means that you can't pay taxes twice. And this is something that they object to, but there's a demand, and that is something that has come not only periodically in French politics, but President François Hollande talked about having a super tax on the super rich and created a maximum tax band of 75%, which lasted a year and a half between 1914 and 1916, until it was seen that it was completely counterproductive. We are now in the realm of pure sort of mood politics, but it's something that's very important in France.
But he has sort of dragged in the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, into all this, and people have made comments about how Macron has created this sort of Americanization of French public life and is really rewarding things that are very un-French, and that he's the president of the rich, says Daniel Bono from France Unbowed. But he's a very powerful character, even in politics, isn't he, Bernard Arnault?
Well, he owns newspapers, and that I think it's more that he's no Rupert Murdoch, but I suspect he bought peace in his time, so to speak, by having he owns a sort of mid-market daily called Le Parisien, and he owns a newspaper, Les Echos, and I think there are a couple of magazines and a classical music radio station, and I suspect the classical music radio station is because he does like classical music, and his wife is a concert pianist. But the aggressiveness about success is something that has existed in France for several centuries. You have to realize that France is a country that, even though we are we no longer have an established religion in France and haven't had that since the time of Napoleon, the Catholicism plus a sort of unregenerated Marxism on the left ally themselves to have a sort of almost philosophical loathing of richness and money. We're not Protestants, we're Catholics in this thing.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, Benjamin, the press never tire of telling us about his fabulous wealth. Not only has he got hundreds of billions, he's got a private island. Apparently he's had a $150 million yacht at his time. He's got plenty of artworks, Picasso's and Warhol's and so on. In your dealings with him, did you find him a particularly flash character or just very, very classy and understated?
For me, he was always incredibly discreet on the one hand, yet I have to admit, when he visited any store, it would be the court of Versailles following him. There would be 30 people behind him, trailing behind him as he would go on a market visit.
Right, so he's kind of a bit of a mixture of both. Dean, how important is Bernard Arnault to the brand? We're sort of moving in towards the succession part of the program now. How important is he as a sort of a symbol and also the executive?
Look, he's important to LVMH, but he's not important, as it were, to the brands themselves, who have their own leaderships, their own marketing and branding teams doing the work that they do. But he's the captain of LVMH in a big way. I think that the big question here is not so much it's if you look at the other people in his kind of, in that category, the Buffetts, the Musks, the Bransons, there's a sense of purpose that they have about them. And I think that's the big question we're looking at here. We have an amazing businessman, shrewd, very good at what he does. So what else can you do? Being rich means you've got money, but being wealthy means you have time. What is the opportunity for Arnault to do something spectacular beyond LVMH that's big? And obviously his passion for arts and culture clearly is a great opportunity to really make a massive statement in something, to Benjamin, hinting at that there is a role to change the world. We do admire successful people. We would just like to know if there's a purpose that they can help.
No, that's a good point. I mean, Benjamin, you were saying before that it's not just about brands anymore. He's moving on to his legacy now, and which is why he's supporting good causes like the restoration of the Notre Dame Cathedral.
Not only the Notre Dame Cathedral, but the only thing he really likes talking about is the Louis Vuitton Foundation. He was able to get a Frank Gehry building built in the Bois de Boulogne, which is the equivalent of Hyde Park for British people. And no one could do that in almost any country anymore. Only Bernard Arnault has that capability of not only finding the way to get the land, finding the way to get the agreements on the political parties, finding the right architecture and leading it to execution. But what's going to leave behind him is the Louis Vuitton Foundation.
And tell us, how powerful is that? How wealthy is it? And what is its purpose?
Well, let me just share a little anecdote. When I was talking with Madame Kennedy, and I said, look at the Frank Gehry building in Bilbao, the Guggenheim Museum. And she's like, wow, I never saw that. It's the same impact. Anyone who's ever been there just says you have to go there. It's a little bit out of the center of Paris, but it's always worth going. Everyone who goes loves it. I've never heard a bad word about the Louis Vuitton Foundation.
Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, while we're talking about legacy, let's talk about succession. He has quite a large family. I think it's about 4 or 5 children. And apparently he has dinner with them once a month for about 90 minutes, or should I say exactly 90 minutes. And I suppose it's sort of like an extended job interview where he's trying to work out who will succeed him. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
It's not always easy being his child. From the accounts I've heard of people who know there is children, there is one possible preferred child, who's Delphine, his daughter, who's already very much associated to his business. But he's a bit like Succession in that he does play his cards close to the chest. His children have married people, and these people are being taken into consideration as would that person be consistent with the object of running LVMH in the next generation. Delphine Arnault, for instance, is not married to her partner of 14 years, who is an important French businessman in the tech and telecoms business, Xavier Niel, but of whom Bernard Arnault sort of softly disagrees. He actually was not happy. He certainly didn't want her to marry him. At the end of the day, he owns a controlling share in the shares of LVMH. So I think it's too big to be taken over. And it will go to the family, but nobody knows who will actually take it over.
Benjamin Rankin, sorry to put you in a slightly invidious position, but who would you guess would actually take over from Bernard Arnault? And is it likely that it will happen according to his timetable, say towards the end of this decade?
Let me answer that in two separate questions. The first thing is what he does to make sure that his children are successful. He always puts them next to incredible expert managers who he rewards very handsomely. So he makes sure they get coached and built into the business. So there's always this combination between external and internal. He's not a nepotistic man. He is a shrewd businessman, as you've described him. That means that he's not just going to take favor to his family. And on the other hand, LVMH is not a collection of brands. It's a financial holding. And the question then is, who's going to have the vision to know which pieces of the business to cut, where are the new opportunities to catch? And that's going to take a different level of integration than just someone who's going to run a big brand already.
But bottom line is, who's the strongest out of the kids?
I don't think that's the question.
Well, it's my question.
I think the real question, I really think it's the, no, but for me, the real question is what combination of internal and external talent will make a go of it and will give a long-term success and a long-term stable success in the future.
Someone's got to be the boss.
I think we'll see.
Okay. Dean Crutchfield, whoever it is, and most likely to be one of the children, I'm sure, you know, of course, who better? Who better, Dean? But if you were advising them, and when Bernard Arnault finally gives over to somebody else, what would you say is the paramount thing to do?
Well, for me, I think we're looking to companies to be purpose-driven. And I don't want to go lightly with that phrase because it's bandied around a lot. But when you have a company that has so much clout, so much role, so much recognition, you know, inspiring billions of people around the world know those brands that LVMH own. They know those brands. They love those brands. This is an incredibly influential company that most probably has captured the most emotional connection of any company in the world in terms of the admiration for it. So how do you use that admiration? How do you use that emotion in a positive way that goes beyond just running a phenomenal business, but to something that has a higher purpose? And if that's arts and culture, to some of the examples that Benjamin pointed out, what more can you be doing? You know, what's that kind of really big goal for Arnault as a person, but also for the future leadership?
I see what you mean, that they can use their money for good causes and so on, but purpose-driven, I mean, we're talking about handbags here, aren't we?
Yes, but we're talking about emotion, people's aspirations, inspirations. I mean, you know, everything about LVMH twinkles, and that's what it does for a lot of people in their lives. It actually makes them feel good. They are emotionally invested. They enjoy it, admire it, look at it. So that's a captured audience in a way that most other brands would die for. They have. So they have that attention. So how do you use that attention into a purpose that can really kind of, you know, communicate to the world something substantial in terms of something that has goodwill beyond the handbag? And I think there's your question, Matt. What's beyond the handbag?
And for Anne-Elisabeth Moutet,
inside it?
For Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, there's nothing beyond the handbags, is there, Anne-Elisabeth? Or
I think the great challenge to the luxury industry is what happens when the bubble bursts. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about handbags that cost, 10,000 euros, a little under, a little over, depending on the company. We're talking about extremely expensive stuff that is branded so that the people who buy feel that they have reached a higher plane in society. I was reading a column by Jamin Ganesh in the Financial Times about 2-3 weeks ago, in which he said at the end of the day, this can't last forever. And I've had this feeling many times. The prices of luxury items when I was growing up, which is 30 years ago, were 2, 3 times, 4 times perhaps the prices of the same items from non-well-known brands. It is now 10 times, 15 times. It bears no relation to reality, which is why Asia is buying so much of it, because they define themselves through something that is a combination of idea of what luxury is and Western notion of luxury. Can this last? And I really ask the question, isn't this, I'm not worried about the Arnault family because they will still be rich, but can the whole extremely expensive luxury world last forever? I'm not sure.
Fascinating point. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, Dean Crutchfield, and Benjamin Rankin, thank you all so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.